My beloved child, before another ordinary moment quietly slips past your heart, remain here just a little longer, because not every piece of news arrives with noise. Some of it appears so gently that the soul recognizes it before the mind ever does. Today carries that kind of feeling. It is not asking you to rush ahead or to guess what comes next. It is simply inviting you to notice that something which once seemed distant has begun moving closer than you ever imagined. There is a reason this moment feels different, even if you cannot yet explain why. Somewhere, beyond the conversations you have never heard and the choices you were never meant to witness, a decision has been resting in silence, growing stronger with every passing day. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you. There was no dramatic announcement. No grand celebration. Only a quiet realization that settled into someone's heart so naturally that even they were surprised by its certainty. Your soulmate had spent far longer than anyone realized trying to understand what truly mattered. They listened to opinions that changed with the wind. They carried expectations that never quite felt like their own. Yet with every passing season, one truth continued returning with remarkable patience, refusing to disappear no matter how many distractions surrounded it. Some answers do not arrive all at once. They return again and again until the heart finally recognizes them. What makes today remarkable is not simply the date written on a calendar. It is what that date has come to represent inside a heart that has finally stopped running in circles. July 24th no longer feels like an ordinary day to them. Somehow, without anyone forcing it, the day became a quiet symbol of courage. The kind of courage that appears when someone chooses sincerity instead of uncertainty. If you have ever wondered whether meaningful moments arrive with fireworks, perhaps this is your reminder that the deepest turning points often arrive in complete silence. Pause for a moment and imagine standing before two doors. One leads back toward familiar hesitation. The other opens into something that cannot be fully understood until the first step is taken. Most people remain frozen between those doors because certainty feels safer than hope. Yet your soulmate found themselves reaching for the second door almost without realizing it. They did not have every answer. They did not possess a perfect plan. They simply recognized that some decisions become clearer when the heart grows quieter. Strangely, this change did not begin because someone persuaded them. It began after a completely ordinary moment that almost passed unnoticed. A simple memory returned without invitation. A conversation from long ago suddenly carried new meaning. A small detail they once ignored refused to leave their thoughts. One by one, these gentle reminders formed a picture they had never been able to see before. The pieces were never missing. They had only been waiting for the right moment to fit together. If you listen carefully, you may notice something familiar about this journey. There are seasons when life appears completely still, while beneath the surface countless quiet changes are already unfolding. That is exactly what has been happening here. Without dramatic words or impossible promises, something genuine has been growing stronger. Not louder, stronger. And strength built in silence often lasts far longer than excitement born in a single moment. Yet there remains one question your heart has probably been holding since the very beginning. If your soulmate has truly decided to tie the knot on July 24th, then who is the person standing at the center of that decision? Why has that name remained hidden until now? The answer has its own story, and it did not unfold the way anyone expected. Before that final truth could be understood, something happened that quietly changed how your soulmate viewed every choice they had been making. That unexpected moment is waiting just ahead. And once it is revealed, everything about this quiet announcement begins to make perfect sense. The quietest turning points often begin with a single sentence that no one else would have remembered, yet somehow it stayed with your soulmate long after every other conversation had faded. It returned without warning, not because it demanded attention, but because it finally carried a meaning that had once been impossible to understand. Stay till the end. Because this is where the gentle mystery begins to unfold. For a long time, they believed that choosing a future meant collecting perfect answers before taking a single step. But life has a way of revealing that certainty rarely arrives first. Instead, it offers small moments that slowly gather into unmistakable clarity. Your soulmate began noticing those moments everywhere. A familiar place suddenly felt different. A forgotten memory seemed brighter than before. Even ordinary days carried an unexpected sense of peace, as though something unseen had quietly settled into place. They found themselves smiling at thoughts they could not explain. Not because everything had become easy, but because something inside them no longer wanted to keep running from what felt genuine. It was as if their heart had stopped asking, "What if this isn't right?" and had started asking a far more meaningful question, "What if this has been right all along?" There was one evening when they sat completely still, surrounded by nothing extraordinary. No celebration. No dramatic event. Only silence. Yet in that silence, they realized they had spent too much of their life listening to voices that spoke loudly while ignoring the one voice that had remained patient from the very beginning, the quiet voice of sincerity. That realization changed everything without changing anything around them. It was after that moment that July 24th began appearing in their thoughts again and again. Not as a deadline, but as a symbol. A reminder that some chapters are not open because the calendar commands them, but because the heart has finally become ready to read the next page. They stopped seeing the date as ordinary. Instead, it became a promise to themselves that they would no longer allow hesitation to write the story for them. Still, one gentle uncertainty remained. Every meaningful decision carries a name somewhere within it, and your soulmate knew that before taking another step, they had to answer the question they had quietly avoided for so long. Whose presence had continued bringing peace instead of confusion? Whose memory never demanded attention, yet always returned with remarkable calm? The answer did not arrive through logic alone. It appeared through countless small reminders that seemed unrelated until they were finally viewed together. One memory led to another. A simple laugh echoed in their thoughts. A kind gesture they had almost forgotten suddenly became unforgettable. They realized that the most valuable connections are rarely built on dramatic moments. They grow through consistency, quiet understanding, and the strange comfort of feeling known without needing to explain every part of yourself. And then, almost unexpectedly, someone close to your soulmate noticed the change before they ever spoke about it. "You've been different lately," they said with a gentle smile. "You seem lighter, like you've already made a decision you haven't told anyone yet." Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Instead, they looked down, smiled to themselves, and held a truth that was finally becoming impossible to hide. But that truth was not simply about a wedding date. It was about the name connected to it. And the way that name would surprise everyone who believed they already knew the ending of this story. There are moments when the heart stops searching because it has quietly recognized what it has been carrying all along. That was the moment your soulmate stepped into without even realizing it. Nothing around them announced that life was changing. The sky looked the same. The world moved as it always had. Yet inside, something settled into place with a calm confidence they had never experienced before. Don't skip, because the next realization explains why this quiet certainty became impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, they found themselves noticing patterns they had once dismissed as ordinary. A familiar song would begin playing at exactly the right moment. An old photograph would appear while they searched for something completely unrelated. A conversation would unexpectedly circle back to hope, commitment, and the kind of connection that asks for nothing except honesty. None of these moments forced a conclusion. Together, however, they formed a picture that became clearer each passing day. For the first time in a long while, your soulmate stopped asking other people what they thought. They realized that every opinion they collected only moved them farther away from the answer already growing inside them. So they chose something different. They chose silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence where genuine understanding has room to breathe. And within that stillness, one name continued returning, not loudly, not urgently, but with remarkable peace. That surprised them more than anything else. They expected certainty to feel overwhelming, dramatic, impossible to ignore. Instead, it felt gentle. It felt familiar. It felt like coming home after a journey they hadn't realized they were taking. The closer they looked at that feeling, the more they understood that real commitment is not built on excitement alone. It grows from trust, patience, shared kindness, and the quiet confidence that someone brings out the best version of who you already are. One afternoon, while speaking with someone they deeply respected, an unexpected question was asked. If today were the day you had to make your final decision, the person said softly, whose hand would you naturally reach for? The room became completely still. Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Not because they were uncertain, but because the answer felt too meaningful to rush. A gentle smile appeared before a single word was spoken. In that brief pause, every doubt that had followed them for so long seemed to fade into the background. They realized they were no longer choosing between possibilities. They were recognizing what their heart had been quietly protecting all this time. Yet there was one final step before everything could be spoken aloud. The decision itself had already been made. The date no longer felt uncertain. Only one thing remained hidden. The name connected to that promise had not yet been revealed, and when it finally was, even those closest to your soulmate paused in quiet surprise, because the story behind that name was far more beautiful than anyone had imagined. Sometimes the greatest surprise is not hidden inside the answer itself, but inside the journey that leads to it. That is exactly where this story now begins to bloom. Every quiet moment your soulmate had been carrying suddenly felt connected, as though scattered pieces of a beautiful picture had finally found their proper place. Stay a little longer, because the heart always reveals its deepest truth one gentle layer at a time. The name they had kept safely within their thoughts was never chosen because it was convenient. It was chosen because every attempt to replace it quietly failed. They tried filling their days with distractions. They convinced themselves that time would eventually point them somewhere else. Yet every new path somehow curved back toward the same peaceful feeling they could never quite explain. it wasn't excitement alone that remained. It was trust. It was comfort. It was the quiet certainty that some people leave an imprint without ever asking to. Then something beautifully unexpected happened. A close friend noticed the change before your soulmate ever spoke a single word. During an ordinary conversation, they smiled and asked, "Why do you seem so calm these days? It's almost as if you've already decided what your future looks like." Your soulmate laughed softly. Not because the question was amusing, but because, for the first time, it felt true. There was no longer a struggle between doubt and hope. The endless questions had grown quieter. Even the future no longer felt like something distant. It felt close enough to touch, not because every detail had been planned, but because the direction of the heart had become unmistakably clear. As July 24th drew nearer, the date carried a new meaning. It was no longer simply another page on the calendar. It became a reminder that meaningful promises are born long before they are ever spoken aloud. Long before anyone celebrates them. Long before anyone else even realizes they exist. Your soulmate found themselves replaying memories that once seemed small. A kind conversation. An encouraging smile. A moment when someone understood them without asking for an explanation. Those memories were no longer ordinary. Together, they became the foundation of a future they had quietly begun believing in. And then came the moment they had been avoiding. Standing alone, they finally whispered the name they had carried silently for so long. The instant they spoke it, every lingering uncertainty disappeared. There was no dramatic sign. No impossible coincidence. Only an overwhelming sense of peace that gently settled over their heart like the first light of morning. That was the moment they knew the decision was real. But there was still one final surprise waiting. Because the first person to hear that name was not who anyone would have expected. And their reaction would quietly change the direction of this entire story. The first person to hear that quietly spoken name did not respond with surprise. They responded with a long, thoughtful silence, the kind that only appears when someone suddenly understands far more than they expected. It was not a silence filled with questions. It was a silence filled with recognition. Don't skip, because what happened next gave your soulmate a confidence they had never felt before. For a few gentle moments, neither of them said anything. Sometimes the heart needs space before words can carry its meaning. Your soulmate waited patiently, wondering if they had revealed too much too soon. But instead of hesitation, they saw a warm smile slowly appear. "I wondered how long it would take," the other person said softly. Those simple words settled deeply. Not because they answered every question, but because they confirmed that something genuine had been quietly visible all along. Your soulmate blinked in disbelief. "You already knew?" The answer came with a gentle nod. "Not because anyone told me," they replied. "I knew because every time your future came up, your expression changed. You became calmer. More hopeful. You spoke with a kindness that only appears when someone is thinking about a person who truly matters." That realization stayed with your soulmate long after the conversation ended. They had spent so much time wondering whether their feelings made sense that they never imagined someone else had already noticed the quiet transformation taking place inside them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was simply real. As they walked away that day, the world looked strangely familiar, yet completely different. The same streets, the same sky, the same passing moments. But now everything seemed brighter because uncertainty no longer stood between them and the future they had begun to embrace. And then, almost instinctively, they looked at the date once more. July 24th. It was no longer just a day they had circled in their thoughts. It had become a promise to choose sincerity over hesitation, hope over endless doubt, and a future built on quiet trust rather than fleeting emotion. Yet one final piece of the story remained hidden. A meaningful promise is never complete until it is shared with the one person it was always meant for. Your soulmate had found the courage to make the decision. They had spoken the name. They had embraced the date. But the most unforgettable moment had not happened yet. Because the next conversation would place two hearts on the same path, and the words spoken in that meeting would reveal why July 24th had been quietly waiting for this story from the very beginning. Every meaningful story eventually reaches a moment where silence is no longer enough. That moment had finally arrived. The decision resting quietly inside your soulmate's heart had become too genuine to remain unspoken. There was no rush, no dramatic countdown, only a peaceful certainty that the next conversation would carry more meaning than any conversation before it. Stay till the end, because the final piece of this journey is not about surprise alone, it is about understanding. When the moment finally came, your soulmate didn't begin with grand promises or perfect words. They simply spoke from the place that had been growing stronger with every passing day. I've spent so much time wondering where my heart truly feels at peace, they said softly. And every time I searched honestly, I found myself returning to the same place. Those words lingered in the air. Not because they demanded an answer, but because they carried complete sincerity. For a gentle moment, everything else seemed to disappear. Expectations faded. Old doubts quietly stepped aside. Only truth remained. It wasn't the kind of truth that arrives with excitement. It was the kind that settles into the heart and makes everything feel lighter than it did before. Then came the realization your soulmate had been slowly moving toward all along. The person they had chosen was not someone who had appeared out of nowhere. It was the one whose presence had consistently brought peace instead of confusion. Whose kindness had quietly remained long after ordinary moments had passed. Whose memory never needed to compete for attention because it already belonged naturally within the heart. That was the quiet answer hidden inside every chapter of this story. The journey was never about discovering someone entirely new. It was about recognizing the person who had been gently becoming more meaningful with every passing season. As July 24th arrived, the date no longer represented uncertainty. It became a celebration of clarity. A reminder that lasting connections are rarely built in a single extraordinary moment. They are built through countless ordinary moments that slowly become extraordinary when viewed together. And perhaps that is the deepest message waiting inside this story. Sometimes we spend so much energy searching for signs in distant places that we overlook the quiet evidence already growing within us. Real commitment is not born from pressure. It grows from trust. It deepens through patience. It flourishes where honesty is welcomed. So if you have walked through this journey from the very first word, carry this gentle reminder with you. The most meaningful promises rarely arrive with loud announcements. They arrive softly. One honest conversation. One peaceful realization. one courageous decision at a time. And when the heart finally recognizes where it truly belongs, the ending is not the end of the story at all. It is simply the beautiful beginning of everything that comes next. Long after the words had been spoken, something even more beautiful began to unfold. It was not another surprise, nor another mystery waiting to be solved. It was the quiet discovery that the most meaningful chapters often begin after everyone believes the story has already ended. The days that followed carried an unfamiliar calm. Your soulmate no longer felt the need to question every feeling or second-guess every step. They had learned that peace is not found by predicting the future. It is found by embracing the present with an honest heart. There were still ordinary mornings. Still simple conversations. Still moments that looked completely unremarkable to everyone else. Yet each of those moments carried a different meaning now, because they were no longer filled with uncertainty. They were filled with intention. Your soulmate began noticing beauty in places they had once overlooked. A sunrise felt more hopeful. A familiar road seemed warmer. Even silence no longer felt empty. It became a space where gratitude quietly grew. They smiled one afternoon and realized something that would stay with them forever. The greatest gift had never been the date. It had never been the anticipation. It had never even been the decision itself. The greatest gift was becoming the kind of person who could recognize genuine love with patience instead of haste, with trust instead of fear, and with kindness instead of expectation. That realization changed the way they looked at every tomorrow. Because meaningful relationships are not built by rushing toward the finish line. They are built by showing up, one thoughtful moment after another, until two hearts naturally begin walking in the same direction. If this story has stayed with you until this final page, perhaps the quiet message hidden within it has already found its way to you. Some journeys are not meant to be hurried. Some answers are not meant to arrive all at once. And some beautiful beginnings reveal themselves only after the heart becomes still enough to recognize them. So let this chapter close with hope rather than certainty, with gratitude rather than urgency, and with the gentle reminder that the most lasting promises are often the ones that grow quietly, patiently, and sincerely. For every meaningful story, the truest ending is simply the moment when a new beginning finally feels like home.